Picture this: Rome, 177 AD. The empire stretches across continents, teeming with millions of lives, ambitions, and conflicts. At its helm stands Marcus Aurelius, a man who could command armies with a word, crush rebellions with a gesture, yet chose a different path. Instead of ruling through fear or force, he carried a simple leather-bound journal, filled not with decrees of power, but with quiet reflections on self-discipline, humility, and the art of leading by example. This was a man who understood that true authority doesn't come from shouting the loudest or flexing strength. It comes from mastering your own mind first. And that, right there, is the essence of Stoic leadership. Think about the last time someone tried to make you do something really make you. Maybe it was a boss barking orders, a parent demanding compliance, or even society pressuring you to conform. How did it feel? Resentment, resistance. Now imagine the opposite. A leader who doesn't push but inspires, who doesn't demand respect but earns it effortlessly through calm, clarity, and unshakable integrity. That's the power of Stoicism. It's not about suppressing emotions or becoming stone-faced. It's about cultivating a mindset so grounded, so focused on what you can control, that others can't help but follow your lead, not because they have to, but because they want to. Today, we're diving deep into 25 Stoic mindsets that have shaped emperors, generals, and modern-day visionaries alike. These aren't abstract theories. They're battle-tested principles that teach you how to lead without force, influence without manipulation, and stand firm in chaos without losing your humanity. Whether you're guiding a team, a family, or simply your own life, these ideas will transform the way you think about power. By the end of this, you'll see why the quietest person in the room often holds the most authority, and how you can too. Let's begin. The first Stoic mindset that separates forceful rulers from respected leaders is this radical focus on what you can actually control. Picture a ship captain in a storm. She can't command the waves to calm or the wind to stop, but she can adjust the sails, steady the rudder, and keep her crew focused. That's the dichotomy of control, an idea so simple yet transformative that it reshaped how Roman emperors governed empires and how modern CEOs navigate crises. The Stoics divided the world into two categories: things within our power, like our judgments, choices, and efforts, and everything else, opinions of others, unexpected events, even outcomes we desperately want. Leaders who fixate on external results, demanding loyalty, obsessing over competitors, or micromanaging uncontrollable variables exhaust themselves and their teams. But those who channel their energy inward, mastering their responses and taking ownership of their actions, create a ripple effect of calm agency. Take Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War. He couldn't control the Confederate Army's movements or the public's wavering morale, but he could control how he communicated, crafting the Gettysburg Address not as a command, but as an invitation to shared purpose. Or consider a startup founder whose product launch fails. The Stoic response isn't blaming the market or the team, but asking, what part did I play? How can I adapt? This mindset shifts leadership from coercion to empowerment. When your team sees you responding to setbacks with clear-headed analysis rather than blame, to criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness, they mirror that behavior. Here's the unexpected truth: influence grows when you stop trying to control others. A study in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that employees working under leaders who practiced this Stoic principle reported 40% higher engagement. Why? Because trust flourishes in the space between commands and autonomy. A general doesn't win battles by screaming orders at soldiers mid-chaos. He wins by training them so thoroughly that they make the right moves instinctively. That's the power of focusing on what's yours to shape your preparation, your ethics, your example. The rest, it's not indifference, it's the wisdom to know that some things respond only to effort, not force. Now imagine being banished to a barren island, stripped of power, wealth, and status. For most, this would be a crushing defeat, but for Seneca, Rome's great Stoic philosopher, it became his most fertile ground for growth. Exiled by Emperor Claudius for 8 long years, he didn't rage against fate or plot revenge. Instead, he called exile an opportunity to study wisdom full-time, turning isolation into the very crucible where he forged his greatest works. This is Amor Fati, the love of fate, a mindset that doesn't just endure hardship but embraces it as the raw material for leadership. The Stoics saw every obstacle as a chance to practice virtue. A delayed flight, time to cultivate patience; a financial loss, a lesson in detachment; a betrayal, a test of forgiveness. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that reframing challenges as opportunities literally rewires the brain, boosting resilience and creative problem-solving. Take Satya Nadella at Microsoft. When he took over as CEO in 2014, the company was seen as a fading giant trapped in old paradigms. Instead of resisting this reality, he leaned into it, telling employees, "We need to rediscover our soul not by clinging to the past, but by falling in love with the future we must create." Under his leadership, Microsoft embraced cloud computing and AI, not because it was easy, but because the industry's turbulence made it necessary. Or consider Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, who credits her billion-dollar success to her father's unusual dinner table question, "What did you fail at this week?" By reframing failure as a badge of effort, not shame, he taught her to see setbacks as stepping stones. When her first product prototypes were rejected by manufacturers, she didn't retreat. She used their skepticism as fuel to refine her pitch. Amor Fati turns resistance into momentum. Here's the key distinction: this isn't toxic positivity or blind optimism. The Stoics weren't saying, "Pretend everything's fine when it's not." They were urging deliberate action, like a blacksmith using fire to temper steel. Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a POW for 7 years, survived by applying this same principle. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, he later wrote. That balanced, clear-eyed acceptance paired with unwavering resolve is what lets leaders turn crises into comebacks. Think of a challenge you're facing right now. What if, instead of resisting it, you asked, "How could this very situation be preparing me for what's next?" Maybe that difficult employer is teaching you patience. The missed promotion is freeing you to explore a better path. The Stoic secret: fate isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. The most influential leaders aren't those with the smoothest journeys, but those who have learned to dance in the storm. There's a counterintuitive practice the Stoics called Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. At first glance, it sounds pessimistic, imagining everything that could go wrong before it happens. But here's the twist: this mindset isn't about fear, it's about inoculation. Think of it like a vaccine for leadership. By mentally rehearsing setbacks, losses, and worst-case scenarios, you build emotional resilience before crises strike, so when they do, you're not paralyzed, you're prepared. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled by his master's brutality, knew this better than anyone. He taught his students to wake up each morning and ask, "What if today brings criticism, delays, or betrayal?" Not to dwell on misery, but to disarm its power. Modern psychology calls this stress inoculation training, and it's used by everyone from elite athletes to special forces operatives. Navy SEAL don't wait for gunfire to practice staying calm. They simulate chaos until their response becomes second nature. Contrast this with reactive leadership. Ever seen a manager who only thinks about next quarter's profits, ignoring market shifts until it's too late? Or a politician who scrambles to contain a scandal that could have been mitigated with foresight? Reactive leaders are like sailors who only learn to patch leaks after the ship is sinking. Stoic leaders, though, are the ones who have already mapped the storm's path. When the Roman Senate panicked during invasions, Marcus Aurelius would recount how he'd visualized these very crises during peaceful mornings, so when they arrived, he met them with steady hands. Take Howard Schultz at Starbucks. In 2008, as the financial crisis cratered sales, he didn't just cut costs. He leaned into the hardship he'd anticipated years earlier. He retrained every barista in espresso craftsmanship, doubling down on quality while competitors raced to the bottom. Starbucks didn't just survive, it thrived because Schultz had already asked, what if customers demand more value, not just lower prices? Here's how to apply this. Start small. Before a big meeting, ask, what if the client rejects my proposal? Not to fret, but to plan your pivot. Parenting. Imagine the tantrum at the grocery store, then rehearse your calm response. The goal isn't to predict every disaster, it's to shrink the gap between expectation and reality. When Jeff Bezos built Amazon, he famously said, "I believe you have to be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time." That's Premeditatio Malorum in action, anticipating criticism so it doesn't derail vision. The irony, leaders who practice this radiate more confidence, not less. A team senses when their captain has already weathered hypothetical storms. It's the difference between a leader who says, "This can't be happening," and one who nods and says, "Right on schedule." That's the gift of negative visualization. It turns anxiety into advantage and chaos into clarity. Imagine standing on the moon, looking back at Earth, a tiny blue marble suspended in infinite darkness. From that vantage point, borders vanish, egos shrink, and what seemed like life or death conflicts reveal their true scale. This is the view from above, a Stoic exercise that snaps leadership into perspective by zooming out, literally and metaphorically. The ancients called it contemplatio mundi, the contemplation of the cosmos, but don't mistake it for escapism. It's a deliberate shift in focus that turns petty power struggles into opportunities for wisdom. Take NASA mission control during the Apollo 13 crisis. As alarms blared and oxygen levels dropped, Flight Director Gene Kranz didn't panic or micromanage. He pulled his team's attention upward, literally, to a photograph of Earth taken from space. "Let's remember what we're really doing here," he said. That shift in perspective transformed chaos into clarity. Instead of finger-pointing, engineers focused on solutions, repurposing spare parts into a life-saving carbon dioxide filter. The Stoics would have nodded in approval. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not in a palace throne room, but under the open sky, reminding himself, "You are a citizen of the universe first and Rome second." The view from above works because it targets leadership's greatest blind spot, ego. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was weeks from bankruptcy, hemorrhaging money on ego-driven projects like the Newton PDA. Jobs' first move, he gathered his team and forced them to confront reality by drawing a simple 4-quadrant chart, consumer and pro on one axis, desktop and portable on the other. "We're going to focus on 4 products," he declared, slashing 70% of Apple's product line. That zoomed-out view, seeing the forest, not just the gnarled branches, saved the company. Here's why this mindset disarms dysfunction. Neuroscience shows that when we're stuck in tunnel vision, the amygdala hijacks rational thinking. But visualizing a broader context, whether it's the vastness of time, the interconnectivity of systems, or the shared humanity of your team, activates the prefrontal cortex, the brain's problem-solving center. A Stanford study found that executives who practiced this Stoic technique made 23% fewer impulsive decisions during mergers. Apply it like this. Next time you're in a heated boardroom debate, pause and ask, how will this decision look in 5 years? When a competitor steals your idea, consider, in the history of human innovation, does this truly matter? The CEO who views layoffs as just business might reconsider if she imagines each affected family's story unfolding across decades. This perspective doesn't dilute ambition, it channels it toward what's meaningful. The irony, the higher you rise, the harder it is to see clearly. That's why Roman generals kept a slave whispering Memento Mori, remember you must die, during victory parades. Today's equivalent might be SpaceX's live streams of rocket launches where the camera deliberately pans back to show Earth's curvature. Elon Musk didn't invent this. He's echoing Seneca, who wrote, "No one can govern others well who hasn't first governed the universe in their mind. So step outside, look at the stars. Then ask, is the hill I'm willing to die on today just a molehill in the grand scheme?" The answer will either sharpen your resolve or set you free. Either way, you'll lead with clearer eyes. There's a reason Roman generals kept a slave whispering in their ear during victory parades. Not to flatter them, but to remind them, Memento Mori, remember you must die. At first, it sounds morbid, even counterproductive. Why dwell on death when you're at the height of power? But the Stoics knew something most modern leaders forget. Mortality isn't a dark cloud to ignore. It's the sharpening stone for urgency, clarity, and unexpected kindness. Steve Jobs understood this. In his famous Stanford commencement speech, he said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, that awareness crystallized. He stopped tolerating mediocre products, cut Apple's bloated projects, and poured his remaining years into revolutionizing phones, computers, and animation. Death didn't paralyze him, it prioritized him. This mindset flips conventional leadership on its head. Most people operate as if they have infinite time. They delay tough conversations, postpone bold moves, or waste energy on petty office politics. But leaders who internalize Memento Mori act differently. Take Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand's former Prime Minister. When a terrorist attack struck Christchurch, she didn't just condemn the violence. She wore a hijab in solidarity with Muslim communities, passed sweeping gun reforms within weeks, and later made global headlines for her compassion. In an interview, she admitted, "Knowing how fleeting time is makes you refuse to waste a single day on divisiveness when unity is possible." The Stoic version of this isn't about fear, it's about focus. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That's why Memento Mori leaders delegate trivial tasks but personally mentor rising talent. They skip pointless meetings but fiercely protect family dinners. They ignore industry gossip but confront ethical breaches head-on. Research from the Harvard Business Review found that executives who regularly reflect on mortality, whether through journaling, visiting loved ones' graves, or even volunteering in hospice care, are 40% more likely to make long-term strategic bets rather than short-term grabs for approval. Here's the paradox: confronting life's brevity doesn't make leaders colder, it makes them warmer. When Starbucks' Howard Schultz returned as CEO in 2008, he didn't just revive profits, he transformed stores into community hubs with healthcare for part-time baristas. Why? Because his father's death from untreated workplace injuries haunted him. "I never wanted anyone at Starbucks to feel that helpless," he said. Memento Mori turns legacy from a buzzword into a daily compass. So ask yourself, if this were your last year leading your team, company, or family, what would you stop tolerating? What would you start amplifying? The clock is ticking, not to scare you, but to free you. As the Stoics taught, it's not about how long you live, but how awake you are while living. And that awareness, it's the quiet superpower behind every leader who changes things for the better. Picture the Roman Empire at its peak, stretching from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked deserts of Egypt, where millions of lives intersected across languages, cultures, and religions. Now imagine ruling it not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. That's exactly what Antoninus Pius did during his 23-year reign, embodying a Stoic principle called Sympatheia. the profound recognition that all things are interconnected, and true leadership means serving the web, not just the self. While lesser emperors hoarded power or waged wars for glory, Antoninus repaired roads, funded orphanages, and settled disputes with such fairness that historians called his reign the calm before the storm. His secret: he saw the empire not as territory to exploit, but as a living organism where every citizen's well-being affected the whole. This ancient idea finds its echo in modern servant leadership, a term coined by Robert Greenleaf in 1970. Leaders like Southwest Airlines' Herb Kelleher didn't just preach teamwork, they lived it, loading baggage alongside ground crews during holidays to understand their challenges. Or consider New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who slashed her own salary during the COVID crisis while boosting frontline workers' pay. These aren't just feel-good stories, they're strategic applications of Sympatheia. Neuroscience confirms that when leaders demonstrate genuine care, it activates mirror neurons in their teams, fostering trust and collaboration. A Harvard study found that companies practicing servant leadership outperform peers by nearly 200% in employee retention and customer satisfaction. But here's where Stoicism adds a crucial layer. It's not about altruism alone. Sympatheia is rooted in logic, the understanding that harming others ultimately destabilizes the very system leaders depend on. Take Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard, who made Earth our only shareholder, not just as idealism, but because he knew ravaged ecosystems would doom outdoor industries. Or Microsoft's Satya Nadella, who transformed a cutthroat culture by insisting, "Our success depends on partners' success." Like Antoninus Pius funding schools in distant provinces to strengthen the empire's fabric, these leaders grasp that interdependence isn't weakness, it's the architecture of enduring influence. The practice is simpler than it sounds. Start by asking whose voices are missing from this decision. When Adobe abolished annual performance reviews, they didn't just streamline bureaucracy, they recognized how arbitrary rankings poisoned collaboration. Or try the reverse org chart exercise used by Zappos Tony HC, where leaders literally place themselves beneath frontline employees to visualize their supporting role. Sympatheia in action looks like a Toyota factory manager working the assembly line to spot inefficiencies, or a teacher principal swapping roles to bridge policy and classroom reality. The twist: this mindset thrives on friction. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What injures the hive injures the bee." When Starbucks faced racial bias incidents in its stores, Howard Schultz didn't blame a few bad apples. He closed 8,000 stores for anti-bias training, acknowledging how one toxic interaction could ripple through the brand. Similarly, Antoninus Pius quelled rebellions not with legions, but by addressing the grain shortages fueling them. Sympatheia transforms leaders from commanders to gardeners, tending ecosystems where growth is collective and power is measured by how much you empower. So the next time you're tempted to focus narrowly on your team's KPIs or your personal climb, pause. Look for the invisible threads tying your success to the janitor's morale, the supplier's stability, even the competitor's health. Because leadership, in the end, isn't about standing apart, it's about seeing how deeply you're woven in. A surgeon's hand hovers over a patient's chest, seconds from making the first incision, when a nurse calls out the blood type on the chart is wrong. In that moment, the difference between a good leader and a great one isn't medical expertise. It's the ability to pause, reassess, and act based on what is rather than what feels urgent. This is the discipline of ascent, Epictetus' Stoic practice of separating raw facts from the stories we layer onto them. And it's what keeps leaders from being hijacked by knee-jerk reactions when stakes are highest. Consider how emergency room teams operate. When paramedics rush in with a trauma victim, the best physicians don't gasp, "This is a disaster." They rapid-fire facts. Adult male, GSW to the abdomen, pulse 120, BP 90/60. By stripping away interpretation, they create space for deliberate action. Epictetus, who endured slavery and exile, taught that our suffering stems not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them. A leader who says, "Our biggest client just quit," risks triggering panic. One who says, "Client X terminated the contract for reasons Y and Z," opens the door to solutions. The legal system embodies this principle daily. A judge instructs jurors to consider only the evidence, not speculation. When Netflix lost nearly 1 million subscribers in 2022, CEO Reed Hastings didn't blame disloyal customers or bad luck. He presented the data. Password sharing accounted for over half the losses, then pivoted to a new monetization strategy. Within a year, subscriptions hit record highs. Objectivity turns roadblocks into signposts. Neuroscience explains why this works. When we label an event as catastrophic, the amygdala floods the brain with cortisol, narrowing focus to fight or flight instincts. But leaders like Satya Nadella at Microsoft train teams to ask, what's the irreducible fact here? During Azure's early outages, engineers circulated postmortems titled not "Why We Failed," but "What We Measured." That shift from blame to analysis cut resolution times by 70%. Try this exercise next time you're hit with bad news. Write down the pure facts on the left side of a page, interpretations on the right. A fact: Q3 revenue dropped 10%. Interpretation: we're falling behind competitors. The first invites problem solving, the second spirals into defensiveness. Legendary investor Ray Dalio calls this radical transparency, building cultures where truth isn't personalized but treated like weather data, something to prepare for, not resent. The irony: objectivity doesn't strip away passion, it channels it. When SpaceX's early rockets exploded, Elon Musk didn't fire engineers for incompetence. He demanded failure reports so detailed they became industry benchmarks. By treating setbacks as pure information, he turned SpaceX from a punchline into a pioneer. Epictetus put it bluntly: first say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. Leaders who master that sequence don't just react to the world, they shape it. Roman Senator Cato the Younger shocked his peers by walking barefoot through Rome's muddy streets in winter, not because he couldn't afford sandals, but because he chose discomfort to test his resilience. While other politicians flaunted wealth to project power, Cato understood a counterintuitive truth: leaders who voluntarily embrace hardship don't weaken their authority, they amplify it. This is voluntary discomfort, a Stoic practice that forges credibility through shared struggle rather than hollow displays of status. Fast forward to modern CEOs like Doug McMillon of Walmart, who started as a warehouse loader, or Disney's Bob Iger, who began as a TV studio grunt. Their rise wasn't accidental. By experiencing frontline realities firsthand, they developed something no MBA program can teach: visceral empathy for the challenges their teams face daily. It's why Starbucks requires new executives to work espresso machines, and why Toyota's leaders still spend shifts on factory floors. These aren't publicity stunts, they're applications of Stoic wisdom. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way," he wasn't glorifying suffering. He was highlighting how purposeful discomfort sharpens judgment. Neuroscience backs this up. A Yale study found that leaders who engage in voluntary hardship, whether it's sleeping on the office floor during a crisis or taking pay cuts alongside staff, trigger heightened mirror neuron activity in their teams. This biological wiring creates deeper trust than any motivational speech ever could. Take Undercover Boss, the TV series where executives work incognito in their own companies. The most revealing moments aren't when CEOs master menial tasks, but when they fail at them publicly. Watching a CFO struggle to stock shelves humanizes leadership in ways PowerPoints never can. But here's the Stoic twist: voluntary discomfort isn't about martyrdom or manufactured humility. It's a calibration tool. By periodically stripping away privileges, whether that's flying coach instead of private or answering customer service calls, leaders prevent a dangerous disconnect. History's worst leadership failures often trace back to insulation. French royalty playing shepherds in faux peasant villages while real citizens starved, or executives approving layoffs via Zoom from gated estates. Contrast that with Winston Churchill spending nights in bombed-out London neighborhoods during the Blitz, or Microsoft's Satya Nadella requiring his leadership team to attend hackathons as junior coders. The practice scales to everyday leadership too. A manager who manually processes payroll once a quarter understands delays more intimately than one who only sees spreadsheets. A teacher who retakes standardized tests alongside students gains insight no curriculum meeting provides. Even parents who occasionally swap roles with their kids, letting them set household rules, discover blind spots in their expectations. Voluntary discomfort works because it replaces abstraction with embodied knowledge. Seneca, who amassed wealth but slept on a thin mattress and ate peasant food weekly, put it best: set aside a certain number of days to be content with the scantiest nourishment. Then ask yourself, is this really so bad? That question asked earnestly, not rhetorically, separates leaders who command from those who truly understand. Because when your team sees you choosing struggle rather than avoiding it, they'll follow you through hell, not out of obligation, but because you've proven you know the way. Marcus Aurelius often pictured his mind as a fortified citadel, a place where external chaos could not infiltrate, no matter how fierce the siege. He wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. This is the inner citadel, a Stoic metaphor for cultivating an unbreakable core of clarity and purpose, especially vital for leaders navigating relentless storms of criticism, doubt, and pressure. Consider Winston Churchill in 1940, standing almost alone in Parliament as his own party members whispered for appeasement with Nazi Germany. The world saw his defiance as stubbornness, history revealed it as foresight. While newspapers mocked him and allies wavered, Churchill retreated not into denial, but into what he called his black dog of introspection, a private mental space where he weighed facts over fears. His secret: he'd spent years preparing this inner fortress. Long before the Blitz, he'd studied history's cycles, understood tyranny's patterns, and steeled himself for isolation. When the moment came, his certainty wasn't arrogance, it was the result of deliberate mental architecture. Modern psychology echoes this ancient practice. Studies on cognitive hardiness show that leaders who develop a strong internal locus of control, the belief that their response, not circumstances, dictates outcomes, are 50% more resilient under fire. Take Angela Arendt, who transformed Burberry's failing brand into a luxury powerhouse. When analysts dismissed her focus on digital innovation as unfashionable, she didn't compromise. "I'd spent years building my compass," she later said, referencing the quiet morning hours she devoted to grounding her decisions in long-term vision, not quarterly noise. The inner citadel isn't about ignoring feedback or becoming emotionally detached. It's about creating a filtering system. When Elon Musk faced widespread ridicule for claiming SpaceX could land reusable rockets, he didn't dismiss critics. He absorbed valid engineering concerns while discarding knee-jerk skepticism. Marcus Aurelius advised, "Ask yourself, what is this opinion of mine based on? Is it rooted in principles or fleeting emotion?" That discernment separates stubbornness from conviction. Here's how to build yours. Start small. Carve out 10 minutes daily to journal not just what happened, but how you interpreted it. When a critique stings, pause and ask, is this about my performance or their expectations? Churchill wrote, "Criticism may not be agreeable, but it is necessary. It functions like pain in the human body. It calls attention to unhealthy developments." The strongest leaders don't silence critics. They let them sharpen their thinking without shaking their foundation. Your inner citadel isn't a wall to hide behind. It's the vantage point from which you see clearly when others are lost in the fog. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but his greatest victory was the territory he mastered within. Whatever storms you face as a leader, that's the ground no one can take from you. The Roman general Scipio Africanus never launched a campaign without uttering two words: Si Deus volurit, if God wills it. At first glance, it sounds like religious ritual, but the Stoics recognized something far more strategic in this phrase. They called it the reserve clause, the deliberate habit of attaching fate permitting to every plan, not as passive fatalism, but as active preparation for life's inevitable curveballs. In a world obsessed with 5-year corporate roadmaps and rigid key performance indicators, this ancient mindset separates leaders who shatter under disruption from those who pivot with grace. Think about Blockbuster in 2004. Their strategic plan: dominate video rentals by doubling down on physical stores. No reserve clause, no acknowledgement that streaming might change the game. Contrast that with Reed Hastings at Netflix, who built his entire leadership philosophy around adaptability. When DVD shipments plateaued in 2007, he didn't deny the data. He accelerated the pivot to streaming he'd quietly prepared for, telling investors, "Our success depends on internet speeds improving as projected. And if they don't, we'll adapt." That subtle qualification, "if projections hold," is the modern reserve clause in action. The magic lies in the psychology behind it. Stanford researchers found that leaders who preface plans with probabilistic language like "assuming market conditions remain stable" make 28% faster adjustments during disruptions. Why? Because verbalizing uncertainty keeps mental flexibility active, like a muscle memory for adaptation. Take NASA's approach to Mars rover landings. Engineers don't just plan for ideal scenarios, they script contingency branches for dozens of potential malfunctions, rehearsing each until response times become reflexive. But here's where Stoicism deepens the practice. The reserve clause isn't just about backup plans. It's a radical acceptance that some outcomes simply aren't ours to control. When Starbucks expanded to Australia in 2000, Howard Schultz assumed American coffee culture would translate seamlessly. When stores struggled, his reserve clause kicked in not as defeat but as recalibration. He scaled back locations, studied local preferences, and returned years later with a tailored approach that thrived. Compare that to WeWork's Adam Neumann, who insisted his company's valuation would only rise unless the laws of economics change. The market obliged him with a painful lesson in unexamined certainty. Try this exercise next time you present a strategy. Add a single slide titled "Assumptions We're Making." List variables like customer behavior, supply chains, or even your own health. Elon Musk does this publicly. When announcing Tesla's production targets, he includes caveats about battery shortages or regulatory approvals. The result: shareholders trust him more, not less, because they see the transparency of his calculus. The reserve clause transforms leadership from brittle to antifragile. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, throw it away. There are brambles in the path, step around them." Simple yet profound. Modern leaders like Microsoft's Satya Nadella apply this by ending meetings with, "What would make this plan obsolete tomorrow?" That question doesn't undermine vision, it pressure tests it. Like Roman generals who carried two plans into battle, one for victory, one for orderly retreat. Today's most resilient leaders know that true authority comes not from never being wrong, but from never being blindsided. More than 2,000 years before the term globalization entered our vocabulary, a shipwrecked merchant named Zeno of Citium sat in the porticos of Athens teaching a radical idea that every human being, whether Greek, Persian, or barbarian, shared membership in a single universal community. He called this concept cosmopolitanism, literally citizen of the cosmos, and it became the bedrock of Stoic leadership philosophy. Fast forward to today, where tech CEOs manage teams spanning 12 time zones and educators prepare students for jobs that don't yet exist. Zeno's vision isn't just relevant, it's the operating manual for modern influence. Take Satya Nadella at Microsoft. When he took the helm in 2014, he inherited a culture infamous for internal rivalries: Windows versus Office, engineers versus designers. His first move, he mandated that every product team integrate at least 3 global perspectives before launch. Not as a diversity checkbox, but because he recognized what Zeno knew: innovation thrives when disparate worldviews collide consciously, not accidentally. Under his leadership, engineers in Nairobi co-designed AI tools with farmers in Iowa, while Seattle marketers learned storytelling techniques from Nigerian playwrights. The result, Microsoft's market cap tripled, not despite these cultural frictions, but because of them. This mindset flips traditional leadership on its head. Most managers see multicultural teams as a challenge to overcome language barriers, conflicting norms, holiday schedules that never align. Stoic leaders like LinkedIn's former CEO Jeff Weiner treat these differences as strategic leverage. When expanding into China, Weiner didn't just translate the platform, he partnered with local designers to create an entirely separate interface honoring Guangxi, the Chinese emphasis on relationship building over transactional networking. By embedding cosmopolitanism into the product itself, LinkedIn China gained 8 million users in 2 years while Western competitors floundered. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. Brain scans show that when leaders actively engage with diverse perspectives, their dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the neural switchboard for creative problem solving, fires 30% more intensely than in homogeneous groups. The ancient Stoics observed this effect empirically. Epictetus taught his students, if you want to improve, be content to appear clueless in the eyes of outsiders. Modern research from Harvard Business School confirms it. Teams that regularly acknowledge their cultural blind spots make better decisions 87% of the time. Here's how to apply this today. Start with the one foreign habit exercise. Every quarter, have your team adopt one work practice from another culture, whether it's Japan's Nemawashi consensus building before meetings or Sweden's fika mandatory coffee breaks for unstructured dialogue. At Pixar, directors rotating through international studios noticed that Korean animators sketched storyboards communally on huge scrolls rather than individual tablets. That small insight revolutionized how they brainstormed sequences for Coco, integrating Mexican muralismo traditions into the creative process. Cosmopolitan leadership also requires what psychologist Michel Gelfand calls tight, loose agility, knowing when to enforce standards and when to adapt. When Unilever launched Sunlight detergent in Nigeria, initial sales flopped because the packaging showed a smiling child, a positive image in the West, but locally interpreted as mocking families who couldn't afford soap. The solution, they hired Nigerian artists to redesign labels featuring community elders, tapping into the culture's deep respect for wisdom. The product became a bestseller, proving Zeno's point. Global citizenship isn't about erasing differences, but weaving them into something stronger. The ultimate test of this mindset: crisis response. When COVID disrupted supply chains, most companies panicked. IKEA leaned into its cosmopolitan DNA, tasking designers in 37 countries to re-engineer products using locally available materials. Malaysian teams substituted rattan for scarce birch, while Polish workshops repurposed textile waste into new fabric lines. The outcome, not just survival, but 73 new sustainable product lines born from constraint. Like Marcus Aurelius advising, whatever arises, adapt to it. These leaders understand that cosmopolitanism isn't about where you're from, it's about how widely you can think. So ask yourself, does your leadership reflect a single postal code or the entire cosmos? When faced with a dilemma, do you default to familiar solutions or actively seek the outsider perspective that might reveal a better path? Zeno's shipwreck didn't just strand him in Athens, it shattered his provincial worldview, making space for something far greater. Your next breakthrough might not come from the boardroom, but from the very voice you've been overlooking. Seneca once wrote that life is like a play. What matters isn't how long it lasts, but how well it's performed. He observed that most people spend their days chasing trivial pursuits, exhausting themselves on what he called the mere spinnings of the spider's web. For leaders, this is especially dangerous. Every ounce of energy wasted on petty gossip, unnecessary meetings, or reactive firefighting is energy stolen from the decisions that actually shape destinies. The Stoics called this adiaphora, indifference to trifles, not as apathy, but as strategic selectivity. It's the art of knowing what deserves your full engagement and what should barely register on your radar. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in World War II and later U.S. President, operationalized this Stoic principle without even knowing it. His famous decision-making matrix divides tasks into 4 quadrants: urgent and important, not urgent but important, urgent but not important, and neither urgent nor important. The magic lies in the middle too. Leaders who mistake urgency for importance, constantly putting out small fires, burn out without ever building anything lasting. Those who focus on the not urgent but important quadrant strategy, mentorship, personal health, create compounding returns. Eisenhower himself spent 2 hours each morning in solitary planning before dawn, refusing to let the day's first interruptions hijack his priorities. Take Warren Buffett's 25-5 rule. He once told his pilot to list his top 25 career goals, then circle only the 5 most crucial. The twist, the remaining 20 became an avoid at all costs list. Why? Because as Seneca warned, trivial pursuits don't just distract, they actively prevent greatness by dilution. Modern productivity hacks like Inbox Zero or Pomodoro timers miss this deeper truth. Efficiency isn't about managing time, but about guarding attention. Neuroscience confirms this. Studies at Carnegie Mellon found that executives who practiced Stoic-style indifference to minor irritants like unnecessary emails or office politics showed 30% higher cognitive bandwidth for complex problem solving. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he famously eliminated stacked rankings, a bureaucratic system that forced managers to grade employees against each other. The result, engineers stopped wasting energy on internal competition and redirected it toward innovation. But here's where Stoicism adds nuance. Indifference isn't neglect. When a pipe bursts in the office, fixing it is urgent and important. But the 100th email debate about font colors in the quarterly report, that's the spider's web Seneca mocked. The Eisenhower matrix's real power comes when paired with what Marcus Aurelius called the ruling faculty, the ability to step back and ask, does this serve the mission or just my sense of busyness? Apply this by auditing your next work week. Label every meeting, email, and decision with 2 tags. Legacy, will this matter in 5 years? And leverage, does it multiply my effectiveness? Legacy leverage tasks get your full presence. Everything else gets minimized, delegated, or deleted. Like a sculptor chipping away excess marble to reveal the statue within, leaders who master indifference to trifles don't just do more, they uncover what truly matters. Yvon Chouinard stood at the base of El Capitan in 1957, staring up at the sheer granite face with a problem, his pitons. The spikes climbers used to anchor themselves were damaging the rock, leaving permanent scars. He could have shrugged and kept using them like everyone else. Instead, he invented aluminum chocks that protected the cliffs, unknowingly embodying a core Stoic principle, the discipline of action. This isn't just about doing things right, it's about aligning every deed with deeper values, even when it's harder or less profitable. Fast forward to 2022, when Chouinard made earth-shaking headlines by transferring Patagonia's ownership to a trust fighting climate change. No IPO, no billionaire exit, just a billion-dollar company walking its talk. That's Stoicism in motion, values made visible through relentless, unglamorous consistency. The discipline of action starts with a simple but radical question. If my beliefs were measured solely by my actions, what would they be? The Stoics called this ascesis, a deliberate practice that bridges thought and behavior. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." For leaders, this shifts the focus from mission statements plastered on walls to daily choices that prove those words matter. When Starbucks pledged to hire 10,000 refugees by 2025, critics called it PR. Then they opened pop-up training centers near conflict zones, tailored ESL programs for barrister roles, and publicly tracked hires. The action silenced skeptics because it cost something: time, resources, relentless follow-through. Modern psychology reveals why this works. A Harvard study found that employees who witness leaders consistently acting on stated values show 90% higher trust levels. Take CVS Health's decision to stop selling tobacco in 2014, a $2 billion revenue sacrifice. CEO Larry Merlo didn't just announce it. He retrained pharmacists as smoking cessation coaches and repurposed shelf space for nicotine patches. The result, a 70% increase in smoking quit attempts near their stores. That's the discipline of action, making values so tangible they reshape reality. But here's where Stoicism sharpens the practice. Epictetus warned, "Circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him." Patagonia's "Don't buy this jacket" campaign, urging customers to repair gear rather than consume, wasn't conceived in a boardroom. It grew from Chouinard's habit of personally sewing patches on torn garments in his garage, decades before sustainability was trendy. Great leaders don't wait for perfect conditions to act. They use whatever's at hand to live their philosophy today. The discipline crumbles without accountability. Ancient Stoics kept hyponomata personal ledgers tracking whether daily actions matched ideals. Modern equivalents thrive at companies like Buffer, where salaries and equity formulas are public, and every product decision links to transparency values. When Airbnb faced discrimination complaints, they didn't just issue apologies. They redesigned the booking algorithm to minimize host bias and published the code for scrutiny. Action without measurement is theater. Ultimately, this mindset thrives on friction. When IBM committed to hiring neurodiverse talent, managers initially balked at accommodating atypical interview styles. The breakthrough came when leaders mandated that teams showing progress on inclusion goals got first pick of top projects, tying ethics directly to career advancement. Like a Stoic willingly stepping into cold water to harden resolve, the best leaders design systems that make doing right inseparable from success. So ask yourself, what's your equivalent of Chouinard's chalks, the small, stubborn action proving your biggest claims? Not the slogan, but the sacrifice, not the speech, but the habit, because in the end, leadership isn't what you say you stand for. It's what you do when no one's watching and everything's on the line. Aristotle walked the shaded paths of his Athenian Lyceum, debating a question that still defines leadership today. What does it mean to truly flourish? His answer, eudaimonia, wasn't about fleeting happiness or applause, but the deep fulfillment that comes from living virtuously. 2,000 years later, Stoic philosophers sharpened this idea into a leadership principle. Authority rooted in ethical action doesn't just inspire, it endures. Consider the cautionary tale of Enron. In the late 1990s, CEO Jeff Skilling was the epitome of charismatic leadership, brilliant, persuasive, commanding. His employees wore "I'm with Jeff" buttons, analysts praised his visionary genius, and stock prices soared. Yet beneath that glittering surface lay a culture cutting moral corners to sustain the illusion. When the truth erupted, 16,000 employees lost their jobs, and countless retirees saw their savings evaporate. Charisma without character isn't leadership, it's performance art with catastrophic consequences. Now contrast that with firms like Johnson & Johnson. In 1982, when tampered Tylenol capsules killed 7 people, CEO James Burke didn't consult PR teams or hedge responsibility. He immediately pulled 31 million bottles from shelves nationwide, a $100 million decision, and pioneered tamper-proof packaging that became industry standard. No grand speeches, just virtue in motion. Decades later, their swift integrity still fuels consumer trust. This is eudaimonia in practice, flourishing through ethical foundations so solid they outlast market cycles and management changes. The Stoics took Aristotle's idea further by making it brutally practical. For them, virtue wasn't abstract goodness but daily exercises in courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. When Marcus Aurelius faced a revolt led by his trusted general Cassius, he didn't execute the traitor's family as Roman custom allowed. He pardoned them, writing, "It's a king's duty to behave better than his enemies." That restraint wasn't weakness, it was strength channeled through principle. Modern neuroscience explains why this works. Acting virtuously triggers the striatum, the brain's reward center, creating a feedback loop where doing right feels as gratifying as personal gain. The corporate world is littered with visionary leaders who burned bright but flamed out. Theranos Elizabeth Holmes, WeWork's Adam Newman, their common flaw. Treating ethics as optional software upgrades rather than core operating systems. Meanwhile, companies like Patagonia and Costco, prioritizing fair wages, sustainable practices, and long-term stakeholder value, consistently outperform peers in customer loyalty and employer retention. A London business school study tracked S&P 500 firms over 20 years, finding those with strong ethical cultures delivered 200% higher returns than industry averages. Here's the Stoic twist: eudaimonia isn't about perfection, it's about direction. When Microsoft's Satya Nadella took over, he inherited a cutthroat culture where stack-ranking employees fostered toxicity. Did he transform it overnight? No, but he started by replacing know-it-alls with learn-it-alls, modeling humility in his own meetings by asking, "What am I missing?" That shift, small in the moment, seismic over time, redefined Microsoft's trajectory. So ask yourself this: when future historians study your leadership, what will they see? The glow of temporary charisma or the bedrock of virtues that outlive you? Because as the Stoics knew, true influence doesn't come from being the loudest in the room, but from being the most principled long after the room has changed. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic philosopher who taught Epictetus, had a saying that still echoes through boardrooms and cockpits today. Just as you wouldn't use a sword to swat a fly, don't expend great effort on small matters. This is proportional response, the art of calibrating your reaction to precisely fit the challenge at hand, not your ego or emotions. Picture an airline captain encountering turbulence. She doesn't grab the intercom to scream, nor does she ignore the seatbelt sign. She assesses the radar, adjusts altitude incrementally, and communicates with calm specificity. "Flight attendants, please take your seats." That's Stoic leadership in motion, matching intensity to circumstance with surgical precision. History reveals the cost of ignoring this principle. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was a proportional response to political threats. But when he later demanded his senators stand for his arrival, that small vanity eroded trust needlessly. Compare that to Abraham Lincoln's handling of General McClellan during the Civil War. Faced with endless excuses for inaction, Lincoln didn't rant or humiliate his top general. He simply penned one of history's most understated rebukes: "If you don't want to use the army, I should like to borrow it." The message landed precisely because its force matched the offense. Modern crisis training embodies this Stoic ideal. Airline pilots practice sterile cockpit protocols. Below 10,000 feet, no non-essential conversation occurs. Why? Because the brain has limited bandwidth for decision-making. Wasting mental energy on trivial chatter during takeoff could mean missing a critical engine warning. Similarly, NASA flight controllers classify incidents on a tripwire scale. A minor glitch might trigger a quiet software review, while a fuel leak demands immediate abort procedures. The system removes emotional guesswork, ensuring reactions align with objective stakes. Neuroscience explains why we default to disproportionate responses. When threatened, our amygdala triggers fight or flight hormones, useful when facing a bear, less so when reviewing a passive-aggressive email. Leaders who master proportional response train their prefrontal cortex to override this instinct. Take Satya Nadella's first week as Microsoft CEO. Discovering a team had concealed a failed product launch, he didn't purge the department. He asked, "What did we learn?" Then restructured accountability systems. The result, a 70% drop in cover-ups within a year. Practical application starts with a 3-tier framework. Before reacting, categorize the issue. Tier 1 requires immediate, full attention, e.g., safety risks, ethical breaches. Tier 2 needs measured correction, e.g., missed deadlines, quality lapses. Tier 3 deserves minimal energy, e.g., tone misunderstandings, minor delays. Southwest Airlines exemplifies this. When a passenger's emotional support peacock made headlines in 2018, most airlines would have drafted lengthy new animal policies. Southwest's leadership, they issued a one-sentence update. No peacocks, they're too big. The restraint made them internet heroes while competitors drowned in bureaucracy. The ultimate test of proportional response comes during failure. When SpaceX's early rockets exploded, Elon Musk could have shamed engineers or cancelled the program. Instead, he framed setbacks as expensive tuition, analyzing each failure just deeply enough to prevent recurrence without paralyzing progress. Like a Stoic distinguishing between what's catastrophic versus inconvenient, he calibrated his response to the lesson needed, not the emotion felt. Proportional response isn't about suppressing passion, it's about directing it strategically. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, throw it away." There are brambles in the path, step around them, that's all you need to know. In leadership terms, don't mobilize the troops for a skirmish, but don't bring a butter knife to a sword fight either. Your team will trust your judgment most when your reactions consistently prove you know the difference. Cato the Younger once silenced Rome's chaotic senate, not by shouting over his rivals, but by sitting wordlessly until the room grew still. When he finally spoke, his few measured sentences carried the weight of an iron hammer, not because they were loud, but because they were rare. This is the power of strategic silence, a weapon wielded by Stoic leaders who understood that words gain force when rationed like precious currency. Modern neuroscience confirms what the ancients intuited. Studies at Harvard's program on negotiation found that negotiators who paused 15 seconds or more before responding secured better terms 23% more often than those who rushed to fill silence. The mechanism is primal. When humans encounter unexpected quiet, our brains instinctively supply meaning to the void. A CEO who pauses after an employee's proposal isn't just thinking, they're signaling that the idea warrants consideration. TED Talk coaches drill this into speakers, calling it the power pause. The most viral talks average 3.2 seconds of silence between key points, long enough for audiences to absorb complexity but short enough to maintain momentum. Consider Angela Merkel, dubbed the world's most powerful mute by Der Spiegel. Her political dominance stemmed partly from her refusal to engage in knee-jerk soundbites. During the Eurozone crisis, as other leaders scrambled for cameras, Merkel's weeks of silence forced markets to stabilize in anticipation of her eventual statements. Or look to Apple's product launches, where Tim Cook will often let a revolutionary feature linger on screen without commentary, allowing the technology to speak for itself. Silence isn't emptiness, it's the canvas on which meaning becomes vivid. The Stoics took this further with apatheia, not apathy, but the discipline of withholding reactions until they serve purpose. When Zeno's students begged him to mediate a dispute, he listened for hours before concluding. you're both wrong, and walking away. The lesson: not every conflict merits your voice. Modern executives like Warren Buffett apply this by enforcing 24-hour rules, no responding to provocations until a full day passes. Amazon's leadership principles encode it as disagree and commit, where silence after a decision signals respect more than hollow compliance. But strategic silence isn't passive. Navy SEAL train in commander's intent, where mission briefings conclude not with exhaustive instructions, but with silent space for operators to internalize objectives. Special Forces units report 28% higher mission success rates when leaders allow this absorption period versus micromanaging details. Similarly, when Satya Nadella took Microsoft stage to unveil their AI future, his dramatic pause before saying, "This changes everything," made headlines precisely because it broke the tech industry's habit of breathless hype. Here's how to cultivate this before speaking. Mentally trace the acronym WAIT. Why am I talking? Is it to add value or fill discomfort? Practice the 3-breath rule in meetings. Inhale deeply after someone finishes before responding. And when you do speak, follow Churchill's wartime advice. Short words are best, and old words when short are best of all. The more economy in your speech, the heavier each syllable lands. The ultimate test comes in crisis. When Johnson & Johnson faced the Tylenol poisonings, CEO James Burke's initial press conference contained just 9 sentences, each one deliberate, none defensive. Those sparse words anchored a response still studied in business schools. Contrast that with executives who bury blunders in verbose apologies, diluting accountability. Like a Stoic standing firm in a storm, sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you don't make because your composure says everything. Heraclitus stood by the river Ephesus 2,500 years ago, watching the water rush past when he uttered 7 words that would echo through millennia. Character is destiny. Not wealth, not talent, not circumstance, character. The Stoics seized this idea like a torch, carrying it into the grit of daily leadership. Because here's what that flickering Greek fire reveals: every decision, no matter how small, is a chisel shaping the monument of your legacy. Take Abraham Lincoln in 1863, drafting the Emancipation Proclamation. His advisors warned it would fracture the Union further. Southern newspapers called him a tyrant. Even his cabinet questioned the timing, but Lincoln had spent decades preparing for this moment, not through grand gestures, but through thousands of small, invisible choices. As a young lawyer, he once walked 6 miles to return 5 cents to a client he'd overcharged. During the Black Hawk War, he carried wounded soldiers on his back rather than leave them behind. By the time he faced the ultimate test of character, his destiny was already written in the ink of those accumulated acts. The proclamation wasn't just policy, it was the sum total of every time he'd chosen integrity over convenience. Nelson Mandela's 27 years in Robben Island prison could have corroded anyone's spirit. Instead, he transformed his cell into a crucible of character. While guards taunted him, he studied Afrikaans to understand his oppressors. When given meager garden plots, he grew vegetables to share with those same guards. These weren't isolated acts of kindness, they were deliberate exercises in what the Stoics called prohersis, the cultivation of moral will. By the time he walked free in 1990, his character had already begun reshaping South Africa's destiny. As he later told biographers, "The cell gave me an unexpected gift, time to become the leader my people needed." Modern psychology confirms this ancient wisdom. The University of Pennsylvania's landmark grit studies found that leaders who consistently demonstrate integrity under low-stakes conditions, like admitting small mistakes or crediting others routinely, are 72% more likely to act ethically during crises. Consider Johnson & Johnson's legendary Tylenol recall. That billion-dollar decision didn't spring from nowhere. It grew from years of internal credo challenges. where executives debated ethical dilemmas as mundane as whether to accept lavish vendor gifts. Like Lincoln's 5-cent walk, these were rehearsals for destiny. But here's the Stoic twist: character isn't static. Heraclitus River never stops flowing, and neither does our capacity to redirect its course. When Starbucks' Howard Schultz discovered employees skipping health insurance due to costs, he didn't just tweak policies, he flew to New Orleans to work as a barrister for a week, experiencing their struggles firsthand. That visceral empathy led to groundbreaking healthcare reforms. Character isn't what you have, it's what you do when the current pulls hardest. The test comes when no one's watching. In 1942, as Nazi U-boats sank Allied ships, British naval officer Roger Fleetwood Hesketh was tasked with falsifying weather reports to mask D-Day preparations. He could have justified small exaggerations. Instead, he insisted on precise, truthful data, just phrased ambiguously enough to deceive. That razor's edge between integrity and pragmatism. That's where destinies are forged. Centuries earlier, Marcus Aurelius faced the same tightrope, writing, "Waste no time arguing what a good leader should be. Be one." So here's the question: what's your 5-cent walk? The small, seemingly insignificant choice that's actually carving your path forward. Because whether you're guiding a nation or a team of 3, your character isn't just shaping your destiny, it's rippling outward, altering the course of everything you touch. And that's not philosophy, that's physics. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who served as advisor to Emperor Nero, faced a dilemma familiar to every leader: rage that could either destroy or drive. His letters reveal a startling truth: anger isn't something to eliminate, but energy to repurpose. Picture a blacksmith's forge. Left unchecked, fire consumes the workshop. Harnessed, it tempers steel. Seneca called this metanoia, the alchemy of transforming raw fury into disciplined action. His method wasn't suppression, it was redirection. Modern sports psychology mirrors this ancient insight. When Phil Jackson took over the Chicago Bulls in 1989, he inherited a team brimming with talent but crippled by tempers, especially Michael Jordan's notorious competitiveness. Jackson didn't bench Jordan's intensity, he channeled it. During film sessions, he'd freeze-frame Jordan's scowls after missed shots, asking, "Does this face help or hurt your next play?" By linking emotion to outcome, Jackson helped Jordan weaponize frustration into relentless practice. The result: 6 championships, not 6 suspensions. The science behind this is revelatory. Brain scans show that anger activates the left anterior cortex, the same region tied to motivation and goal pursuit. Stanford's research on elite athletes found that those trained to reinterpret adrenaline surges as performance fuel improved reaction times by 22%. Tennis legend Serena Williams exemplifies this. After a line judge's controversial call cost her the 2009 U.S. Open semifinal, she could have spiraled into resentment. Instead, she spent the next year refining her footwork, later crediting that loss for her record-breaking Olympic gold. Like Seneca advising Nero to write your anger rather than wield it, great leaders treat fury as data, a signal pointing where to dig deeper. But Stoicism tempers this with crucial nuance. Seneca warned that unchecked rage becomes libido dominandi, the lust to dominate rather than improve. Contrast 2 coaching styles. Bobby Knight, the Indiana Hoosiers legend, famously hurled chairs across courts, his outbursts eventually overshadowing his wins. Meanwhile, Duke's Mike Krzyzewski, facing a blown call in the 1992 NCAA Finals, gathered his team and said, "The refs took 2 points. We'll take 20. His players responded with a historic comeback. Both men felt fury. One let it control him, the other let it clarify him. Practical application starts with Seneca's 3-question pause. 1. What truth is my anger revealing? E.g., our product failed because we ignored user feedback. 2. What constructive action aligns with this truth? E.g., instituting customer panels pre-launch. 3. What would trivialize this energy, e.g., berating the engineering team? Pat Summitt, the winningest NCAA basketball coach in history, applied this framework brutally. After losses, she'd storm into the locker room, not to scream but to scribble "why" on the board. Players learned to anticipate the question, analyzing failures before she arrived. Her anger wasn't a threat, it was a spotlight. The ultimate test comes when stakes eclipse sports. When Merck CEO Ken Frazier, one of Fortune's most powerful black executives, faced shareholders angry over his commitment to diversity, he didn't appease or attack. He redirected the energy into Merck's 50 Million Lives initiative, tying inclusion directly to vaccine development. The result? A 20% surge in minority clinical trial participation data that silenced critics more effectively than any rebuttal. So the next time your pulse pounds over a setback, ask Seneca's question: is this fire burning my house or forging my tools? Because the difference between a leader who explodes and one who elevates isn't the absence of anger, it's the presence of a plan. Marcus Aurelius scribbled his most famous words in the dead of winter, camped along the frozen Danube River while Germanic tribes threatened Rome's borders. The obstacle is the way. Not an empty mantra, but a battle-tested strategy, one that transforms barriers into the very path forward. Consider Starbucks in 2008. As the financial crisis cratered consumer spending, Howard Schultz didn't just slash costs or pray for recovery. He saw the economic turmoil as a catalyst to rebuild Starbucks' soul. Closing every store for an unprecedented 8,000 stores nationwide retraining, he doubled down on what competitors were cutting: espresso craftsmanship, barista education, the visceral theater of coffee making. The result, a 70% surge in customer satisfaction scores and a stock price that quintupled within 5 years. The crisis wasn't a detour, it was the only route to reinvention. This mindset flips conventional wisdom on its head. Most leaders see obstacles as nuisances to circumvent, like traffic cones forcing a detour. Stoic leaders like Schultz treat them as the road itself. When Apple's design team hit a wall creating the first iPhone's touchscreen, Steve Jobs didn't soften his vision. He handed engineers a challenge: make it work or we'll find someone who will. The pressure cooker environment birthed the pinch-to-zoom mechanism that became industry standard. Neuroscience explains why this works. When the brain interprets obstacles as threats, cortisol impairs problem solving. But when reframed as puzzles, the same stressors trigger dopamine spikes that enhance creative cognition. A Stanford study found executives trained in Stoic reframing generated 42% more viable solutions during supply chain disruptions. History's greatest turnarounds share this DNA. When Lego neared bankruptcy in 2003, CEO Georgian Vig Nudstorp didn't blame digital disruption for killing brick sales. He asked, how do physical toys become allies to screens, not casualties? That pivot birthed Lego video games and movies, turning a dying company into the world's most profitable toy brand. Similarly, Nintendo's failing Wii U console in 2012 became the petri dish for their Switch hybrid, a flop repurposed into a billion-dollar innovation. Marcus Aurelius would have recognized the pattern. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The practice starts with 3 reframes. First, obstacle as diagnostic, like a doctor viewing symptoms as clues. When Microsoft's Satya Nadella took the helm in 2014, he diagnosed internal rivalries not as personality conflicts but as data points revealing outdated incentives. His solution: rewriting review systems to reward collaboration over competition. Second, obstacle as forge, the weight that strengthens the blade. Kobe Bryant's infamous 4 a.m. workouts began after a playoff loss where exhaustion betrayed him. Instead of resenting the fatigue, he weaponized it, conditioning his body to outperform rivals in overtime. Third, obstacle as invitation, the hole in the market no one else sees. Airbnb's founders capitalized on hotel shortages during 2007's design conference by renting air mattresses, exposing an entire industry blind spot. The ultimate test comes when disaster strikes. In 2010, when BP's Deepwater Horizon rig spewed millions of barrels into the Gulf, CEO Tony Hayward's infamous "I'd like my life back" comment revealed a leader who saw the crisis as an inconvenience. Contrast that with Edison's response when his lab burned down. "Thank God all our mistakes are wiped clean." 67 and bankrupt, he rebuilt within weeks, delivering the phonograph shortly after. The difference: one saw fire as terminus, the other as kindling. So when your next obstacle looms, be it a lost client, a failed product, or a personal setback, channel Marcus in those frozen war camps. Don't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Ask, "What is this revealing, forging, or inviting?" Because the barrier isn't blocking your path, it's sculpting the leader you're becoming. When Epictetus taught Stoicism in 1st century Greece, he didn't lecture from a cushioned chair. He lived in a clay pot with one broken stool and a single lamp. His students didn't follow him because his words were eloquent, but because his blistered hands proved his philosophy wasn't theoretical. This is leading by example at its most raw, not just preaching principles, but embodying them so completely that your very existence becomes the lesson. Fast forward to modern leadership failures like WeWork's Adam Neumann, whose community-first rhetoric collapsed under revelations of his private jet commutes and self-dealing real estate deals. The dissonance between word and deed isn't just hypocrisy, it's strategic suicide. Neuroscience reveals why, when employees witness leaders violating stated values, their brains trigger the same distress signals as physical threats. A Harvard study tracking 20,000 workplaces found teams with walk-the-talk leaders showed 48% higher discretionary effort, the kind of initiative that turns good companies into legends. The military has institutionalized this Stoic principle for centuries. When General James Mattis commanded Marines in Iraq, he didn't just mandate body armor, he wore his own in 120-degree heat, even when protocol allowed officers lighter gear. His logic echoed Epictetus: discipline starts when the commander's comfort ends. This ethos scales beyond battlefields. During Southwest Airlines' early days, CEO Herb Kelleher famously loaded baggage alongside ground crews during holiday rushes. When COVID hit, CVS Health's Karen Lynch didn't just praise frontline pharmacists, she worked overnight shifts in Bronx stores to experience their challenges firsthand. But here's where Stoicism adds nuance. Leading by example isn't performative martyrdom. Marcus Aurelius warned against leaders who wear their humility like a robe, grand gestures meant to be seen rather than silent habits rooted in character. Contrast Elizabeth Holmes' black turtleneck theatrics at the Ronos with Microsoft's Satya Nadella quietly replacing stack ranking systems that bred internal competition. One manufactured a persona, the other dismantled barriers to teamwork through structural change. The most potent examples live in micro moments. When Starbucks' Howard Schultz discovered stores skipping employee coffee tastings, a ritual meant to deepen product knowledge, he didn't issue a memo. He showed up unannounced at a Seattle location, tasted espresso with baristas, and later wrote, "If we're too busy to do this, we're too busy." The message spread faster than any policy update. Similarly, when Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard commits the company to environmental activism, he doesn't just sign checks, he handwrites letters to customers repairing decade-old jackets, proving sustainability isn't a marketing play but a lifetime practice. Military academies teach this through followership, training future officers spend months taking orders before giving them. West Point cadets scrub floors alongside kitchen staff, not as photo ops, but to internalize that leadership isn't about hierarchy, it's about shared burden. NASA astronauts undergo the same ethos. Before commanding missions, they serve as CAPCOMs, the voice linked to space crews, learning how every instruction sounds from the receiver's end. The Stoic twist, true example setting, requires uncomfortable transparency. When Bridgewater associates Ray Dalio makes his mistake logs public, detailing every flawed trade and misjudgment, he's not seeking absolution. He's modeling that growth stems from visible fallibility. Like a Stoic teacher admitting gaps in knowledge, this vulnerability paradoxically strengthens trust. Psychological safety research confirms it. Teams with leaders who openly acknowledge errors innovate 37% more than those with infallible bosses. So ask yourself, where does your calendar, wardrobe, or daily habits belie your professed values? Do you preach work-life balance while emailing staff at midnight? Advocate sustainability while commuting solo in a gas guzzler. The most powerful leadership tool isn't your speechwriter or logo. It's the alignment between your smallest actions and loudest proclamations. As the Stoics knew, people may doubt what you say, but they'll always believe what you do. Marcus Aurelius never intended his meditations to be published. Those private reflections written in military camps between battles, in the lonely hours before dawn, were his personal toolkit for leadership. Pierre Hadot, the philosopher who devoted his life to studying these texts, revealed their true power. This wasn't just a diary, but a deliberate exercise in mental clarity. Each entry was a mirror Marcus held up to himself, asking not what happened today, but how did I meet today with virtue? Modern leaders from Jeff Weiner to Oprah Winfrey have adapted this practice, turning morning journaling into what Hadot called a philosophy of the office. Take the three-question ritual used by LinkedIn's former CEO Jeff Weiner. Before touching email or scheduling meetings, he opens a notebook and writes 1. What would today look like if it were perfect, visualizing the ideal? 2. What will I say no to protect that vision, setting boundaries? 3. Who deserves my full presence today? Allocating attention, this isn't wishful thinking, it's strategic self-awareness. Research from the Dominican University of California shows leaders who journal their goals with this specificity are 42% more likely to achieve them. But Stoic journaling goes deeper than productivity hacks. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, his morning pages included a version of Marcus' negative visualization, noting how the company could fail, then working backward to prevent it. He credited this practice for anticipating cloud computing's rise while competitors clung to outdated models. Similarly, Arianna Huffington's post-burnout journaling ritual includes writing one lesson from a past mistake, a direct echo of Epictetus' advice. Write down how you were wronged, then burn it. The lesson remains. The key lies in structured prompts that force clarity. Ray Dalio's pain plus reflection equals progress framework has Bridgewater associates leaders journal after setbacks using what pain did this cause, acknowledging impact, what was my exact role. Owning agency, what system would prevent recurrence, engineering solutions, this transforms emotion into actionable insight. A Yale study found executives using such templates made 37% fewer repeated mistakes. For those new to the practice, start small. Benjamin Franklin's evening journaling took just 5 minutes, reviewing 2 questions. Where did I neglect virtue today? Or where did I practice it better than before? Modern adaptations might replace virtue with values, like a manager tracking when they listened versus interrupted, or a parent noting patient's lapses. The power isn't in volume, but consistency. The most transformative application comes from General Stanley McChrystal's battlefield journals in Iraq. Each night he'd write 3 observations. 1. What did I assume that proved wrong? Testing mental models. 2. Who acted with unexpected courage? Spotting quiet leaders. 3. What's the one thing only I can do tomorrow? Focusing leadership, this ritual helped him dismantle bureaucratic silos and build the agile teams that defeated Al-Qaeda. Journaling's magic isn't in the ink, but the interruption of autopilot, like Marcus pausing mid-campaign to ask, am I ruling with justice or ego? today's leaders create space between stimulus and response. The blank page becomes what Hadot called the philosopher's court, a private tribunal where your actions face judgment before the world ever sees them. Whether it's 3 sentences or 3 pages, the discipline of daily reckoning turns leadership from reaction to artistry. Stephen Covey's famous circle of concern versus circle of influence model gets a Stoic upgrade when applied to leadership. Picture 2 concentric circles. The outer one contains everything that worries you: market volatility, competitor moves, even office gossip. The inner circle holds what you can actually shape: your team's trust, the clarity of your communication, the culture you cultivate daily. Most leaders exhaust themselves wrestling with the outer ring, like a general fretting over the weather instead of training his soldiers. Stoic leaders flip the script. They pour energy into the inner circle, knowing its ripple effect expands their impact far beyond formal authority. Take the U.S. Navy SEALs approach to mission planning. Commanders don't waste breath complaining about foggy intelligence or terrain challenges. Their circle of influence starts with ensuring every team member understands the commander's intent so thoroughly they can adapt when plans crumble. During the Bin Laden raid, when a Black Hawk helicopter crashed in the compound, no one waited for orders. SEAL improvised instantly because their leaders had invested in trust and shared purpose, not micromanagement. This is Stoic team building in its purest form. Focus on what you can control, your people's readiness, and let go of rigid scripts. Modern companies thriving in uncertainty operate the same way. When Patagonia's CEO Rose Marcario discovered that traditional supply chains conflicted with environmental values, she didn't lobby governments first. She turned inward, investing in fair trade certifications and recycled materials until the company's influence grew so undeniable that competitors had to follow. Or consider Pixar's Brain Trust, a feedback system where filmmakers voluntarily expose rough cuts to peers with zero authority to mandate changes. By creating a culture where vulnerability equals strength, leaders like Ed Catmull expanded their influence without issuing a single command. Neuroscience explains why this works. When leaders prioritize trust over control, they activate their team's prefrontal cortex, the brain region tied to intrinsic motivation. A MIT study found that teams granted autonomy over even small decisions like rearranging workspace performed 32% better on creative tasks than those following strict protocols. Contrast that with toxic environments where leaders claw for control through surveillance or threats. Like a gardener obsessively tugging seedlings instead of tending the soil, they stunt growth by mistaking dominance for cultivation. Practical application starts with 3 shifts. First, replace "how can I fix this" with "who can I empower to fix this." When Microsoft's Satya Nadella took over, he didn't dictate cloud strategy. He asked engineers, "What would you build if Azure was your startup?" Second, measure influence by proxies. Starbucks' Howard Schultz tracked not just sales but partner-employee satisfaction scores, knowing happy baristas would organically boost customer loyalty. Third, embrace reverse accountability. At Brazilian firm Semco, CEO Ricardo Semler let employees set their own salaries and schedules, then held them responsible for results. Productivity soared because trust became reciprocal. The Stoic twist: your circle of influence grows when you stop policing its borders. Ancient generals knew that troops fight hardest for leaders who share hardships. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no time on what you can't control, but shape what you can with such excellence that others are drawn to your standard." That's the alchemy of trust-based leadership. It transforms followers into allies and obstacles into proof points. Your authority stops where your influence begins. And that, as the Stoics knew, is a boundary worth expanding. Pliny the Younger's quill scratched across parchment as Mount Vesuvius rained fire upon Pompeii in 79 AD. His letters to historian Tacitus didn't describe panic or helplessness, but deliberate action. organizing evacuation boats, distributing food to refugees, and calmly documenting the eruption stages even as ash choked the sky. While others fled blindly, the 25-year-old magistrate became the crisis's scribe and stabilizer, not because he lacked fear, but because he channeled it into precise, purposeful motion. This is equanimity under fire, the Stoic art of meeting chaos with composed agency, a skill as vital for modern leaders navigating stock market crashes or cyber attacks as it was for ancient Romans facing lava flows. Modern disaster psychology confirms what Pliny demonstrated instinctively. When Hurricane Katrina submerged New Orleans in 2005, hospitals with leaders trained in stress inoculation, protocols simulated crises rehearsed under pressure evacuated patients 30% faster than those relying on ad hoc decisions. The U.S. Marines' OODA loop observe, orient, decide, act mirrors Pliny's method. His letters reveal a mind constantly passing new data, rising sulfur fumes, earthquake frequency, reorienting priorities, shifting rescue efforts to coastal villages, and adjusting tactics using wet cloths as makeshift respirators. Leaders who master this rhythm don't eliminate chaos, they dance with it. Compare Pliny's response to the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011. Plant manager Masao Yoshida faced overlapping crises, tsunami damage, reactor meltdowns, and conflicting government orders. Like Pliny, he avoided paralysis by narrowing focus to controllable variables. While officials debated evacuation radii, Yoshida formed a suicide squad of engineers to manually pump seawater into reactors, a risky improvisation that prevented total catastrophe. Both men understood what cognitive scientists now call structured improvisation. Pairing rigid protocols, Pliny's Roman emergency decrees, Yoshida's radiation containment checklists with flexible adaptation, using fishing boats for evacuations, repurposing fire trucks as coolant pumps. The Stoic twist: equanimity isn't innate, it's built through premeditation. Pliny's uncle, Pliny the Elder, died in the eruption because curiosity overrode caution. The younger Pliny survived because he'd mentally rehearsed crisis responses during his legal training. Modern equivalents include Walmart's war rooms, where executives simulate supply chain collapses, or Singapore's annual blackout drills, where entire neighborhoods practice living without electricity. When COVID hit, Taiwanese Health Minister Chen Shih-chung activated protocols drafted after SARS, stockpiling masks, updating contact tracing apps while other nations scrambled. Like a Stoic visualizing worst-case scenarios, these leaders treat peace as preparation for storms, but true equanimity also acknowledges human limits. After 9/11, New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani's composed press conferences projected stability, but later accounts revealed his team's exhaustion and fraying judgment. Contrast that with Air New Zealand CEO Rob Fife during the 2010 Christchurch earthquake. He cancelled flights, then joined baggage handlers serving free coffee to stranded passengers, modeling both decisiveness and vulnerability. Like Pliny admitting his body trembled while his mind stayed clear, great leaders balance steely resolve with emotional honesty. So test your crisis readiness with Pliny's 3 questions. What's the immediate threat? Not theory's concrete dangers like falling ash or server failures. Who depends on me? Pliny prioritized children and elderly. Modern CEOs might focus on frontline employees or data security. What's my next physical action? Not grand strategies, the literal next step, whether hitting evacuation alarms or backing up servers. Because when the ground shakes literally or metaphorically, the leaders remembered aren't those who predicted the quake, but those who stood firm while the earth cracked beneath them. Augustus Caesar inherited a fractured Rome, a republic gutted by civil wars, its institutions hollowed out by corruption and violence. Where others saw ruins, he saw raw material. Over the next 41 years, this unassuming man with a weak constitution and no taste for military theatrics would rebuild Rome's foundations so thoroughly that his system endured for centuries. His secret weapon, a Stoic mastery of the long game, the discipline to plant trees whose shade he'd never sit under. Contrast Augustus with his grand-uncle Julius, the charismatic conqueror whose meteoric rise and bloody collapse left Rome in chaos. Caesar crossed the Rubicon for instant glory. Augustus spent decades carefully restoring senatorial dignity while quietly consolidating power. Where Caesar flaunted triumphs with lavish parades, Augustus repaired aqueducts and grain supplies. The difference wasn't talent, it was temporal vision. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Leaders who prioritize delayed gratification activate the prefrontal cortex's strategic planning centers, while those chasing quick wins trigger primal reward circuits that crash as fast as they spike. A Harvard study tracking 50 Fortune 500 CEOs found those with decade-scale thinking delivered 300% higher shareholder returns than peers fixated on quarterly targets. The business world teems with cautionary counterexamples. WeWork's Adam Neumann raced to a $47 billion valuation through reckless expansion, only to watch it implode when basic governance questions arose. Compare that to Amazon's early years, where Jeff Bezos famously told investors, "We're willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time." His 2014 decision to funnel profits into Amazon Web Services, a then obscure infrastructure project, seemed irrational until it became the profit engine funding everything else. Like Augustus patiently transforming Rome's provinces into loyal partners rather than plundered territories, Bezos understood that true leverage compounds silently. Stoicism reframes patience as active cultivation, not passive waiting. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Think of yourself as dead, you have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly," he was prescribing the ultimate long game lens, measuring decisions against a finite timeline. Modern leaders apply this through premortem exercises, imagining their company's obituary to clarify what legacy requires today. Pharmaceutical giant Merck employed this during its 70-year quest to eradicate river blindness, sustaining research despite zero profit potential. The payoff: a treatment delivered free to millions and a reputation that still attracts top scientists. Augustus' masterstroke was structural patience rebuilding systems that outlasted him. His civil service reforms professionalized governance so thoroughly that even incompetent emperors couldn't fully derail Rome's momentum. Similarly, Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto didn't just design hit games, he created development pipelines nurturing generations of designers. The Mario franchise thrives 4 decades later because its caretakers prioritize nurturing new talent over milking nostalgia. The test comes when short-term pressures scream. In 1985, with Apple hemorrhaging money, Steve Jobs could have slashed R&D to appease investors. Instead, he greenlit the Macintosh team's riskiest ideas, knowing real innovation can't be rushed. His successor Tim Cook doubled down, patiently building supply chains and chip expertise that later let Apple control its destiny. As Seneca observed, time discovers truth. The empires worth building aren't those that blaze brightest, but those that burn steadily long after their founders are gone. Seneca once wrote that we should live our lives as if our every action were being observed by our ancestors and descendants alike, not for judgment, but as a sacred relay between generations. This was the essence of docendo vivimus, the Stoic principle that teaching isn't confined to lectures, but etched into daily choices that ripple beyond our lifetimes. Consider the legacy of Frederick Douglass, who escaped slavery to become a thunderous voice for abolition. He didn't just give speeches, he built schools for freed black children, knowing literacy was the shovel that would dig the next generation out of oppression's grave. His famous quote, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men," wasn't poetry, it was a blueprint for legacy. He planted oaks in a storm, trusting saplings he'd never see mature would one day break the wind for others. The Stoics measured legacy not in statues or wealth, but in prosoph, the quality of attention we invest in the invisible future. Marcus Aurelius scribbled reminders to himself about fleeting fame. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died and returned to the same earth. What endured wasn't his conquests, but the systems he refined: Rome's legal codes, its infrastructure, the very idea that an emperor could also be a philosopher. Modern parallels emerge in leaders like Paul Polman, former Unilever CEO, who tied executive bonuses to long-term sustainability goals. Critics called it naive. Today, Unilever's sustainable brands grow 50% faster than others, proving that legacy thrives when metrics outlive tenures. Legacy building demands a paradoxical duality: urgency paired with patience. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison studying Afrikaans, not just to understand his jailers, but to plant seeds of reconciliation that would bloom decades later. When asked why he invited his former prison guards to his presidential inauguration, he replied, "You can never hate someone once you know their story." That foresight, the ability to suffer for a future you won't inhabit, is the marrow of Stoic leadership. SpaceX's Gwynne Shotwell embodies this today, mentoring young engineers on Mars colonization projects she knows she'll never witness. Legacy isn't a noun, she says, it's a verb disguised as daily work. Practical legacy starts with what psychologists call generativity, the drive to nurture successors. When Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard transferred ownership to an Earth-protecting trust, he didn't just donate a company, he rewrote capitalism's code. Similarly, Starbucks' Howard Schultz revolutionized healthcare for part-time baristas, not because it boosted quarterly profits, but because he remembered his father bedridden after a workplace injury left him uninsured. These leaders grasp Seneca's lesson: we teach what we live, and we live what we believe long after we're gone. Here's how to plant your own acorns. First, build systems, not monuments. Just as Rome's aqueducts outshined Augustus' statues, focus on processes that endure: mentorship programs, ethical frameworks, open-source knowledge banks. Second, measure in decades. Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto designs games with 100-year logic, asking, will this mechanic still teach joy in 2120? Third, embrace obscurity. The real legacy architects are often unsung, like Vivian Thomas, the black lab assistant who pioneered heart surgery techniques in the 1940s, training white surgeons who received the acclaim. His reward, knowing the work itself, was the monument. The final test comes when no one's watching. Every morning, ask Seneca's question: what am I doing today that only the future will understand? Because legacy isn't about etching your name in stone. It's about laying stones for others to stand on, long after your hands are dust. Imagine standing at the forge where every one of these 25 Stoic mindsets has been hammered into shape, each one distinct, yet all part of the same unbreakable sword of leadership. This isn't a collection of isolated tools, but a single philosophy where control meets compassion, where resilience fuels reinvention, and where every obstacle becomes the whetstone for sharper judgment. The thread weaving them together, the recognition that true authority doesn't come from titles or force, but from the daily practice of aligning your actions with principles deeper than circumstance. Take Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire yet journaling each night to hold himself accountable, or Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard, turning environmental activism into a corporate structure that outlives him. These leaders didn't just adopt Stoic ideas, they lived them as a cohesive system. Amor Fati taught them to embrace setbacks, while the view from above kept them grounded in purpose. The discipline of action ensured their values weren't just spoken, but etched into policies and products. Like a master chef blending ingredients into a singular flavor, Stoic leadership merges these mindsets into something greater than their parts, a way of being that transforms not just how you lead, but who you become in the process. Here's the challenge: don't overwhelm yourself trying to master all 25 at once. Instead, each week, pick one mindset and wear it like a lens through which you view every decision. Start with the dichotomy of control. Ask yourself hourly, is this mine to solve or mine to accept? The next week, practice Premeditatio Malorum by visualizing a potential setback in your work or relationships. How would your meetings change if you began with the view from above, remembering that today's crisis will look microscopic in 5 years? This isn't about perfection, it's about progression. Like a sculptor refining a masterpiece, you're not carving stone, you're carving character. Epictetus, the former slave who became history's most influential teacher of leaders, left us with a question that cuts deeper with time. What kind of leader does philosophy demand you become? Not what your industry expects or your resume boasts, but what the truest version of your potential requires. The answer won't come from scrolling or skimming. It's forged in the quiet moments when you choose patience over panic, accountability over excuses, and legacy over likes. So as you step away from this, don't just admire these ideas from a distance. Put them to work. Let them unsettle you, recalibrate your compass, and when no one's watching, remind you that leadership isn't about the spotlight. It's about the light you carry and how steadily you hold it for others to follow. The world doesn't need more bosses. It needs more Stoics leaders who lead not because they can, but because they must.